and understand the Indian education system. Whether this education system of India, I'm not talking about the new education policy 2020 only, but the education system of India right from the age of the Gurukuls, the first phase of imparting education in the country, right from that date I'm talking about. I'm trying to understand the education system and connecting it with enhancing quality and driving change. Delegates, when we talk about understanding Indian education system, we have very enriched, inherited education system. All of us know, whether we talk about the Indian system of education which was being imparted in the Gurukuls, or otherwise, if you talk about the education which was at the time of Mughal period, or otherwise colonial period, or after independence of the country. These are the different phases actually. But in all phases, we have learned, we have enhanced our quality of education. And if we see, the changes have driven in those systems and the policies which came into being even after independence of policies. How could we think of the present day education policy? Our brains are thinking that has become able, we could become capable to understand and discuss and brainstorm on such issues of enhancing quality and driving change when we had been provided education which is enriched. So what I want to say here is that Indian system of education is not a poor system, it is enriched system, inherited system, very advanced system of education. We have had diversified education. Diversified means different skills for learners. Learners belonged to different categories, communities, and in accordance to the requirement of the learners, education was being imparted to them. So it is a diversified education system. When we talk about enhanced quality, the components which I raised or the issues which I raised, if we see morality, culture, I have given the answer that our education system is enriched. Enriched means these components are there in our education policy. When we talk about the diversified, that every religion, caste, and everything should be covered. So here I would like to share with you that our education system is, the past education system is diversified education system. Then when we talk about established system, the teacher taught relations were exemplary in the past. Exemplary in the sense that we had the special sort of bondage between the teacher and the learner. If we say give the instance of Gurukuls, the education was being imparted in the Gurukuls where the student has to live, leaving his home, and had to follow the instructions given by the guru, the teacher. So it means some sort of bondage was there. Knowledge was there, orderliness was there, discipline was there, and zeal of learning was there. The zeal of learning was to provide knowledge for preparing the person, learner, able to face the society be able to face all situations. So that sort of education was being imparted in India in the past. We can give the example of Eklavya. I think all of you know this instance that though Eklavya was not attending the class of the Gurukul, but he had to come that institution. He tried to hide himself, but he came there and learned the things. So it means the system of established institutions was there, and it was being paid importance at that time. So it is in my opinion required that there must be established institutions, and it was there in our education system. What is happening today is that the education policy, sometimes I'm not talking about the education policy of 2020, but generally what happens that most of the times the academicians, the teachers, the teaching administrators, they are not called to be involved in the board or in the system when the format or the framework of education policy is prepared. And if there are some people, there is some sort of prejudices most of the times, not fully, but most of the times, and that leads to see the one dimension. So we have to understand that if these components are there, if there is no prejudice, definitely our policy is perfect. Then, when we understand the existing education system, the pattern of education which is there in India, so far, religion has been given due importance because religion itself is not the wrong thing. It guides us, it suggests us to follow the value system. So it is necessary for the learners to develop the feelings, the values, to become a good citizen of the nation, to be a patriot. So religious values are important, and these were being paid due importance in the education system. Even in the morning, there is morning assembly in the institutions. The purpose is that the learner must learn the skills, must imbibe these qualities in his behavior. So the religion is important. Then mathematics. India is the country which has introduced zero. India is a country which has initiated very say tremendous achievements in the field of mathematics. So mathematics, education of mathematics is also important in the education system, and this is there in the system. Mathematics as well as science is there. We talk about Pushpak Viman. So that is science. Then the important quality of a learner is to understand the things logically. So logic is also important. And this is there in the education system. The education pattern of the country is developed in such a way that there is understanding of the logics. We can talk about the Gurukuls, the Takshila, the Nalanda, and the established educational institutions where these things were being imparted. This sort of education was being imparted. So we can say that our education system is a complete package. It is preparing, and it was preparing people in all respects. Now we can see when we talk about education in the past and education in the present, we can say that there are phases in the education, in the dissemination of education in India. Like, first phase is the phase when we talk about the Gurukuls. This is the first phase, the initial phase of the Indian system of education, Gurukul system. The second phase is the phase when Islamic education in the Middle Ages came into existence or was imparted in the country. Islamic education, that is the second phase. And the third phase is when the Western education in the colonial period was introduced by the Europeans. And after independence of the country, the new phase has come into being. This is the present day phase of education of the country. And in all these phases, there was special emphasis on quality education. Like first phase, if we talk about first phase, that is the education system at the time of the Gurukuls. Education was being imparted by the gurus, means teachers, who used to provide education in the Gurukuls, educational institutions established at the place of the Guru residence or nearby of the Guru, the teacher. And the viewpoint of the educator, the teacher, or the teachings included moksha or enlightenment. This was considered as the important component of education just to ensure quality, enlightenment. Then, based on Varna or religion, scriptures were there, and those were meant for establishing, ensuring the quality of education or the quality concept of education. People who used to face the war situation, warlike situation, so education was being imparted to them, which was related to warfare. So that component of quality was also there in the education system at the time of the education of the Gurukuls. And the communities or the people who had to deal with the commerce and vocational sort of activities, they were being imparted education of commerce and vocations. So commerce and vocational education was there in the Gurukuls. So we can say for some categories of people who were to deal with the Varna system, they were being imparted Varna education, scriptures, knowledge of understanding of scriptures, sort of education, warfare type of education, then commerce and vocational education, and those who had to deal with the skills, they were being imparted skill education. So we can say there was a quality component in the first phase of the Gurukuls, wherein the education was imparted as per the requirement of the learners in the practical life. That I want to share here in this platform. Now, when we talk about the shift from Gurukuls to the succeeding periods, all of us know that there has been increase in population, and with the increase in population, educational institutions played a key role, established exclusive, though in Gurukuls there were established institutions, but exclusive educational institutions like Takshila, Nalanda, they existed. in the period of, say, Gupta dynasty. And they have done a tremendous job, or their contribution is remarkable in dissemination of education. And as a result, education and learning expanded widely. Then, after, if we say the history of education, we would find that Buddhism, Jainism, and other religious gurus, they have disseminated the education. Their followers, they disseminate the education of Buddhism and Jainism, and the education was imparted in the institutions. Then, after, in India, education of medicine, philosophy, grammar, art, craft, such sort of education was also added. So the scope of education has widened, expanded, and the quality component has enhanced. As per the increase in population, the threats, the challenges, the expectations which the society was expecting from the education system, those were incorporated in the education system, and people became perfect. Then, for kings, especially since they had to face they had to deal with the followers, so they needed the education of politics, what we say as dandaniti politics. They required the education of economics, what we call as varta. They required education of philosophy, anvikshiki philosophy, and they required education of history or historical traditions, what we say as itihas. So that sort of education was being imparted to the kings. Isn't it a quality component? It is a quality component. Since it is added and it is requirement, it was a requirement of the kings, and that was incorporated in the education system. So quality component was there for the kings. Then Kautilya, which we mentioned, who is considered as authority of Arthashastra, he has mentioned in details. He has connected the economy with the politics. A very excellent combination. His contribution is excellent in the field of education. Similarly, Niccolo Machiavelli, who has written The Prince, their contribution are tremendous for enhancing quality of education and driving change. Friends, as I told you that one of the components is that importance should be paid to women. There must be respect and regard to women. Because if we see in our practical life also, if we see that the role and the contribution of women is much higher than the male. So what is happening in some time intervals, not always, that women were not being given importance. And this is the reason that the discussions or the some talks on gender issues are emerging. This is a reality. In some time intervals, women were not given importance, whereas they are the role models of building the society and the nation and the economy, even the entire system. It is an agreed fact, even in our spiritual books, epics, and also in different the contributions of scholars. So if we talk about Rig Veda, there is a special mention of female poets. In Rig Veda, female poets were called as Brahmavadinis, Brahmavadinis, and they were being given very important place. If we see 800 BC, women such like Gargi, Maitreyi, those were the scholars. Their names are mentioned as scholars in the Upanishads. They have contributed the religious system as scholars. And if we talk about Buddha, God Buddha, his mother Maya was an educated queen. So we can say that women in India contributed to writing, like the Pali Canon that was written by women. So in Sangam literature, you would see the contribution of women. And today also, we expect that the education policy must pay special importance to women. Now, as I talked about the mode of communication, we agree that Devanagari was the language. Devanagari inscription, which was in Sanskrit, was discovered in North Karnataka. And from the parts of the inscription are in Kannada script. And the country considers Devanagari as a mother language. And Sanskrit, taken from inscription, is from Sanskrit, quite enriched, and it is the instrument of our education system. Similarly, we can talk about the transformation of entry of the knowledge dissemination by the scholars like Zhang, Yizing, and these are mentioned even in the, if we see the scriptures of Nalanda University, there is mention of Dharmadeva. So scholars have also contributed views in enhancing knowledge, enhancing quality of education, and driving change. So similarly, if we talk only about the Gurukuls, the Rig Veda, I think it would not be justifiable, because the contribution of all phases is not nevertheless. So when we talk about the second phase, that is the advent of Islam. At that time, Qutbuddin Aibak and other Muslim rulers had initiated institutions which imparted religious knowledge. We talk about the Nizamuddin Aulia, Moinuddin Chishti, who were scholars, and the institutions were established like madrasas, maktabs, those were established. Scholars were there. I have just talked about Nizamuddin Aulia, Moinuddin Chishti. Their contribution is excellent in education, in quality of education. Then one important change which has been driven in this phase is introduction of science and humanities. So when we talk about today's inclusive approach of education, that was there. in the period of Mughal or advent of Islam. So this inclusive approach was appreciated by Akbar as well as Aurangzeb. So we cannot say that any phase is less in quality education. Excellent contribution of every phase. We generally say that British they came in India and exploited the resources. Of course, this was there, but when we talk about dissemination of quality education in the regime of British and the contribution of the British education, that is not any way less. British education was providing certain features, certain changes were introduced, like published material that was introduced at the time of British. Development of curricula that was developed in the time of British. A format devised for education that was there at the time of British, like Lord William Bentinck and Thomas Macaulay. We call about Macaulay's education policy. Those were excellent. So charges from students and incentives were very important initiative was taken at the time is that students should be charged for getting education. We say that taking charge from the student is a bad thing. It is not so. If charge is nominal and acceptable, it is instrumental to attract the attention of the students. So the system of education which the British established was that take the charges from the students because that would be helpful to compensate the teachers. So quality would definitely improve when the teacher is getting some incentive and the student is serious because he has to or she has to pay for that education. So that would be leading to quality education. So that concept was also introduced by the British and is still there today. So at the time, again, the established institutions like missionary schools were established in the 1820s, I think. So missionary schools were established. So many changes have taken place at the time. Even the opportunities to seek education outside the country was also provided at the time of British. And technical education was also given importance. So that phase, British phase, has proved a successful step in the direction of quality education of the country. Now coming to the present day period, post-independence period, when we have our constitution was framed and there is a provision of right to education. Article 21A, I am talking about right to education. In the right to education, everyone has the right to get education without any sort of discrimination. This is there. To what extent it is implemented, I don't know. But this is there. Inclusive education initiative, it is the requirement. And it is the initiative taken by the government. Like we talk about Praud Shiksha, the adult education, and complete education, Satat Shiksha. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was initiated with a motive to educate all. spread of educational institutions and infrastructure in every area, rural area and far-flung areas of the country. That is also initiated in the country. And for that, a series of educational policies have been initiated. We can start with seeing the documents, the evidences that there is a package of educational policies, like Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, who was India's first Minister of Education also. He envisaged strong central government control over education throughout the country and initiated and stressed upon uniform educational system, which I was talking about. So that is there in the mind of the thinkers, the well-wishers of the country, and consequently, if we see the contemporary phase of education policy, the national policy for education, was initiated in the year 1968, long back, 1968, and it emphasized upon a radical restructuring and then proposed for equal educational opportunities in order to achieve national integration and greater cultural and economic development. As I earlier stated, I don't know to what extent it is there, but it is there in the national policy of education. Then, as I told earlier, that there is a requirement of mode of communication. So emphasis was also drawn upon language. Still, we need to think, even in this new education policy, a solution has been made to have the communication mode which is accepted by the locality, which is substantial in terms of dissemination of knowledge, and which is globally acceptable and orienting people, learners, to communicate outside the country. So different modes of communication, they are required, and that is there in the new education policy, which is a very good point. We generally refer to the new education policy, the National Policy of Education of 1986. This policy paid special emphasis on the removal of disparities also. It means that the component of disparity which was there in the policy of 1968 was expected not to be covered in till 1986, and that was there fully in the education policy of 1986, since it is a requirement to remove the disparities. There should be no discrimination. There should be no disparity. All are equal. So, new education policy is also has also incorporated this component of avoiding or removing any sort of disparity. We are all human beings. We must pay regards to all of us, and in terms of, say, economic standard or otherwise any difference or any discrimination, we should not compare others with us by discriminating. So discrimination is not a good thing for human beings, for citizens. So this component is also there. So if we talk about the education policies, there is a due weightage to the different religions, different communities, and these must be there if we have to enhance quality, if we have to drive a change. The 1986 National Policy of Education was again modified in different time periods like 1992 and 2005, and a special change which has taken place at the time of the education policy, which was modified in the year 2005, is the policy which was emphasizing upon common minimum program as a very good initiative. That at least this basic limit must be similar. So this was the existing pattern of education, which is quite enriched. We are having a very healthy education system, which has succeeded in enhancing education and which has driven changes. It is only the education, different education policies, due to which we could succeed in technology, in science, in every sphere, in business, in diplomacy, in governance, everywhere. So, if India could establish itself as a fast growing and successful country, the contribution goes to the different education policies which have developed such minds, such leaders who are able to deal with the different situations. This is about the then education policies, enhancing quality and driving changes. Now, talking about new education policy 2020. I think how much time is left? Is it 3:30? I think. So, since the time is over, so I think I should close my talk at this point. So till this time, I just in brief talk about the new education policy. The new education policy claims that it would lead to this is the threshold of the new education policy, so we cannot say that it is having a package of these facilities and these would lead in enhancing quality and drive the change. This is a claim because the education policy is initiated and the results would come in the later years. But what are the claims? The claims are access, equity, quality, affordability, accountability. These are the claims of national education policy by 2030. The education policy says that if this policy is implemented in 10 years, we would be able to access, to establish equity, to establish quality, and we will be able to afford we will have the quality of affordability, and we would be accountable. It also claims sustainable development and aims to transform India into vibrant knowledge society and global knowledge superpower by making schools and college education more holistic, more holistic, more holistic, flexible, multidisciplinary. The components are already there, but the policy claims that we would be sustainable in terms of knowledge and other ways. So when we talk about the features of this education policy, it ensures universal access at all levels of school education, early education care, childhood care and education by changing the curricula. All of you know that the new system of education is from the very beginning of the child, like 3 years of age. I don't know whether it is correct or not. National curricula and pedagogical framework for early childhood care. National mission for foundational literacy and numeracy by Ministry of Human Resource Development by 2025 is claimed. And certain reforms are being claimed by the new education policy. It is emphasizing upon multilingualism and the power of language. And it is claimed that no language will be imposed on the students. In special place is being given on the vocational education. Curriculum material would be developed, and formative assessment, regular assessment system would be there for skill enhancement, for which assessment centers would be established, and inclusive education. So these are the claims. And if we succeed, definitely we can say that the education quality would enhance and would drive the change. In context to higher education, standards are established. We know that RUSA was introduced, and the objective is that gross enrollment ratio should be increased. There are certain higher education regulatory authorities which have been planned to be established, like for seeing the regulation, there would be National Higher Education Regulatory Council. If the regulation have to be seen, then that separate agency, the council would be established in order to see that the standards should be qualitatively good. There is standard setting. So there is separate proposal of the body, which is General Education Council, for providing funds to the educational institutions to establish the educational institutions and infrastructures. There is a provision of Higher Education Grants Council. And in order to get accreditation, because nowadays the new education policy says that the colleges and the universities, these would be autonomous in the phased manner. So accreditation, in order to establish the accreditation, there is provision of National Accreditation Council. So huge, not many things are there in the education policy. It is a good initiative, but we cannot fully say that it is the complete or the holistic initiative. It is one step in ahead in the direction of quality education and driving change. With these words, I close my talk. I'm grateful to the organizers for providing me this opportunity to talk on this occasion. Now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Devendra. It was very wonderful and it was very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I couldn't write on the chat box because the chat is not available. It has been disabled. So I had to convey my gratitude to your speech like this. Sorry if I have disturbed you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Audience, you can ask your queries. Participants, you can ask your queries if you have.
Hello. Dear participants, you have any queries? Kindly ask the question to the SIR's mail ID. We have sent the mail ID of the resource person. You can freely ask the question. Post the question into the SIR's mail ID. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. ஐபிஎஸ்சி மெயில் ஐடி போட்டிருக்கேன். சார் மெயில் ஐடி நீங்கள் இப்போ கொடுத்தாதான்.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, it was very nice and a simple language review on the whole curricular and the policies which is being focused in the field of education. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, I have just a quick clarification. When we talk about curricular frame